Good afternoon and welcome everybody to today's webinar hosted by ECIS. ECIS is the Educational Collaborative of International Schools, established for 55 years as a not-for-profit organisation. We have over 500 members in 78 countries. My name is Georgie McIntyre and I am the Chief Learning Officer at ECIS, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's webinar. We will be sharing a recording of today's webinar, and there's an opportunity throughout which Paul will provide a portal for to ask questions. There should be some activity as well as we work our way through. As part of the ECIS community, we have a number of key partners and innovative schools who provide exemplary and innovative examples of education. Please let me introduce our experts. Paul Magnuson is the Director of Educational Research at LAS, Leysin American School. His background and interests include curriculum and instruction, professional development, summer camps and languages. He is a regular blogger with the International Educator and more recently ECIS. Özge is a professor in the field of educational management. She works at Hasan Kalyoncu University and holds a doctorate in education administration. Özge has taken active roles at national and international schools, including teacher training, principal training and school development projects. And she is the ISATT, International Study Association on Teachers and Teaching Outreach Coordinator. The Centre's directors, Paul and Özge, draw on their current research to share how the Centre creates interconnected communities of learning, contributes to the professionalism of the faculty, the power of networks across schools, institutions and universities, and a shared growth mindset. Please join me in welcoming and handing over to Paul and Özge. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks Georgie, thanks ECIS for having us, and thanks to all of you who are watching either here live or the recording later. We've got two big goals. Georgie said them in the introduction there, more or less. We want to meet you if you have some sort of similar educational research center or professional development center at your school. It'd be very good to get to know you and hear what you're doing if you want to contact us. We also want to show those of you who maybe don't have too much or don't have anything at all, like on this sort of scope. I mean, the scope might be a little overwhelming because we've been at this for a while, but we believe that many schools, or if not all schools, could benefit by getting a little start, doing something small, taking a small step in this direction. And hopefully the presentation inspires you to want to do that in your school situation. So I will introduce myself, and then Özge, you go ahead and introduce yourself, and Özge then will start us off. I'm at the Leysin American School in Switzerland at about 1,300 meters at a little ski station. We have 280 boarding students. They're from grades 7 to 12 in the US system. And we have a US curriculum plus the IBDP here at school. My interests, like Georgie said, curriculum instruction, PD, and for about the last 10 years, I've been really focused on student agency and self-regulation. The name has changed a few times, but the general principle of really focusing on getting students to be their own best advocates has been my goal. I think that comes from my role in summer camps in the past. And yeah, happy to be here. Really looking forward to the time we have together. We'll try to keep it to a half an hour max of us. We'll try to keep it a little conversational, and we'll have lots of time for questions and discussion at the end.
Hello. So it's my pleasure. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Georgie, and thanks to ECIS, because it's my pleasure to be a part of this community and to talk about our experience and journey of communities of practice in Switzerland and in Turkey. I am a scholar. I'm a professor in the field of educational leadership and teacher education, and now I serve as a vice rector at my university, at Hasan Kalyoncu University in Gaziantep. But I also served as a teacher at an international school, at ENCA schools, for the last 2 years, because I thought when we train our teachers and when we try to cultivate our teaching skills, we have to be practice oriented. And most of the time, unfortunately, when we become full professors, generally we claim that we stay connected with schools, but unfortunately, we have limited amount of time to stay connected with the schools. So it was a challenge for myself because I thought it would be a good idea for me to teach at an international school in the IB program. And then, you know, also at the same time, my journey with Paul started in Kazan, because in Kazan, I attended a conference, an IZ regional conference. We have an organization, 40-year-old history, International Study Association on Teachers and Teaching. And at IZ, we held a conference, International Teacher Education Regional Conference in Kazan, a federal university. And Paul and I, we were in the same session. And suddenly we started to talk about teacher education. And then after a while, we realized that what Paul is focusing on completely aligns with what I do in academia. So Paul has been practicing what we have been talking about in the books. And generally, we talk about lots of things in the books, in articles, but it's difficult to find it at a school setting. So I became very interested and delighted to hear more about what Paul did at Leysin American School Educational Research. And now I will again leave the floor to Paul to talk about more about how he has established Leysin. Because in 2 years ago, I became a visiting scholar. So now I still serve as a visiting scholar, but at the same time, I see myself as a resident scholar because I visited Leysin a couple of times each year for the last 2 years. I started to invite visiting scholars and resident scholars to Leysin in Switzerland, in the beautiful Alps. So Paul, I guess it will be better
because of all your involvement, Özge, we've really got a nice Turkish connection here now, right? With lots of scholars and lots of connections. And then Özge, of course, invited me also to come and visit her. So I've got a nice, well-rounded vision of what she's doing and where she's at. I'm going to put into the chat something called Agile Coffee. This is just a link, and it's really simple. But if you follow that link in the chat and just open up that window, it's very, very easy to enter any comment or question, thought, anything along the way. If you put your thoughts there, then after we finish talking together, we'll go back and look at all of the collected comments. And you can actually vote on which ones you'd most like to hear about. They'll go to the top, and we'll answer those from the top down. We may get to all of them. It depends on how many there are, but don't hesitate to put in your questions there. We also put in our emails on that same board, so if you want to email us privately, you certainly can. Yeah, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the Research Center. We're going to focus mostly on resident scholars and visiting scholars. This is what Özge and I have been writing about most recently, but you might be well served by having a little bit of an overview of what we're doing. So we started more than 10 years ago with a little setup of professional learning communities. We had a couple of speakers from the outside who cost a lot of money and predictably, often as is the case, didn't have much lasting effect. And so I asked if I could have that same pot of money to create an internal program, which we did, and we started running PLCs for faculty. We're still doing it now, 10 plus years later. When the first group got done, they said, well, what's next? So we added on another program and started working with that. Over time, we've worked on some observation tools. We've created our own observation systems and so on at the school. And we've developed other programs and other choices for all faculty to be involved. So we've run the TESMC, that's for English language learning across the curriculum. We've focused on tech for quite a while. We did a lot of Google training for a while, like many schools. We've focused on special needs. We changed our assessment process. We've been focusing on that for the last 3 years. And as we got better at creating opportunities for faculty to engage in professional development, we started offering also to outside groups. So bringing groups in on a Friday or Friday and Saturday on various topics. Somewhere in the middle there, maybe 5-6 years ago, we were approached by Samsung to try out some of their hardware and software. And we got very lucky by actually researching the use of that equipment in our school. And the success of that study helped us create formally the research center. And we called it then LAS Educational Research, or LASER, really on the back of that one larger study, because we realized that we could test stuff. We could be our own best advisors for deciding if there's something that we want to invest in or pursue, if we actually tested it and looked at the data. So on the backs of that, I got a little bit of a permanent space, a little bit more recognition, and I was able to start working with both resident scholars and visiting scholars. So resident scholars that Özge will talk about are those who are our own faculty here at LAS. She's been researching their involvement and the impact that the program has. And then we'll talk about visiting scholars. Those are those who come, like Özge. And I know there's some others on the webinar right now. So thanks for being here. So those folks who come from other institutions and work with us, I'll talk about them afterwards. So Özge, back to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul. And now when we talk about the term resident scholars, to be honest, it was difficult for me to understand it, because when we use the term resident scholar, when we use the term scholar, you assume that you're going to be at a faculty, at a university setting, in teacher education faculty or faculty of education. So when I just stepped into Leysin, the beautiful mountain, and saw that the faculty sort of setting Paul created, I was amazed, because it was like a dream for me, because we talk about establishing faculties of education in a school setting. In Turkey, we tried to do it a couple of times in various universities before, and with my friends from the field of faculty of education, from the field of education, we worked on the idea of communities of practice and how we can cultivate communities of practice in a school setting, and how we can use communities of practice as a means for professional development for the teachers, for the teacher candidates. So it's not easy, but when I went and when I visited Leysin American School in Switzerland for the first time, I was amazed, because they have their own faculty office, a couple of, and now they have a chalet actually. After 2 years, now they have a beautiful chalet, chalet. And in that chalet, you can see how research serves as a means for professional development. And you can see a culture enhanced with research, with the idea of research. But the research, the term research is used not to produce articles. It's used not only to present papers. Research is a mean. Research is a path that allows and enables scholars who are resident scholars at the school setting to cultivate their research skills, but at the same time their teaching skills and their interaction with the students and their interaction with the community.
Özge, I think that's really important to note, right? Because the word research can even be off-putting, because it's like, oh, I don't know if I want to be involved with that. But it's really much more action research, or how I often talk about it, is documenting what we're doing so we can have a good conversation about it.
Exactly, exactly. Before 10 years, like in 2008 and 2009, I was a visiting scholar at Arizona State University. And in those days, there is a report called Shulman Report talking about how action research should be incorporated in the PhD programs, in EDE programs. Because most of the time in graduate education, we talk about communities of practice, we talk about action research, but generally it's on the air. It's so difficult to incorporate it in a school setting. So after 10 years, I was thrilled to be a part of an action research. After a while observing the way how action research is implemented in a school setting, also I became a part of that action research, and I became a part of that community of practice through which we are collecting the stories of resident scholars, visiting scholars, and also documenting our own stories. Because after a while, as a professor from the field of education, teacher education, I started to criticize myself more and to see our strengths and weaknesses and looking at a mirror, because each of those resident scholars from Leysin American School were able to hold a mirror to me. And I was able to hold a mirror. And when I visited first time, actually, the interesting part was normally, you know, as a routine, when we go to schools, when we visit schools, generally all the doors are opened, you know, in many parts of the world. In IZ, my friends also know it, you know, familiar with that idea. But when I went there, Paul said to me, Özge, you are more than welcome. You can visit our classrooms, but be careful. You know, I cannot propose that idea to my resident scholars. They should invite you. So they should welcome you. And after a while, after having some lunch talks and dinner talks with my friends and with my colleagues, they started to welcome me and invite me to their classes. And each time I visited them, it was more like a part of being a part of community of practice with their students and with the teachers and talking a lot. And then being a part of that classroom setting. And our post-reflection sessions were more like post-reflection for me, because I was learning, and I was learning as a professor. And when I visited one of our friends, Daryl's class, TOK class, it was so interesting because grade 11 students, and this year they were grade 12, I visited their class as well, they were shocked because I said I'm a professor from the field of teacher education, and they thought, okay, what are you doing here? I'm learning. I'm going to learn how to teach TOK from your teacher, Daryl, and I will learn from you. And then they learned and they embraced the idea that, you know, you can be any part of the world, you can be very professional in your field, but you can still continue your lifelong learning process. What do we do and what way have we done so far? The first time I visited Leysin, it was, I said, you know, visiting classes, trying to understand the idea, the rationale behind laser. Because, okay, we say, okay, research is important, but then we're looking and we're focusing on the product. But here, product is not important. The process is important. So the way how the idea of communities of practice is implemented there. When I talked and had some conferences with my friends from Arizona, I said to them, look, there is a school, they're implementing what we have been talking about for the last 10 years. We have been talking about the way how it can be implemented, and there is a perfect model, a very ideal model that we can observe and we can visit. So we have more visiting scholars who are planning to come and visit Leysin in the coming years. I hope COVID passes away and we will have some IZ visiting scholars who will visit Paul's system over there, and the system created with the wonderful people at Leysin American School. And we're collecting stories of the resident scholars and visiting scholars. And
can you share some of those? Like what have you learned now so far from the research? That's where you're headed, right?
Exactly, yeah. So when we are talking about the way how laser is created, generally there are some snapshots that I want to share. For example, the term becoming professional has been used a lot of times in their studies, because they say that, you know, their identity is evolved over time. So they started as a teacher, but then they propose a project to Leysin. And if their project is supported, then like a faculty member, they are working on their project for at least 1 full year. And that in that 1 full year, they present papers, they publish papers, and they publish some articles. And they become, and they feel so professional because they become a part of that academic world and reflecting their best practices in an academic world. So it's an ideal model for an action research, because in their action research, resident scholars work on their project. It could be from the field of IB, for example, TOK, theory of knowledge. It could be something with linked with the geography. It could be something about digital citizenship. It could be about something about ESL or technology, whatever, or some residence life in the dorms. So depending on their field of study, these resident scholars try to make a change in the lives of their students, in the lives of their friends and colleagues, but at the same time, they can see the way how their identity of becoming a professional evolved over time. And the second theme that emerged out of this conversation was about feeling like a faculty member and doing research as a means of professional development. So they also confessed that most of the time, when they heard the term research from Paul first time, they weren't very sure and they wanted to have a chat about it. So Paul served as a mentor, and his mentorship helped them to feel more secure to travel along the path of professionalism and in that path of action research. And this year, when I had some longer conversations with them about action research, most of the time they didn't openly say that it was an action research, but when we talked about it, their journeys a couple of times, they said, yes, it's an ideal example for an action research. And that action research, that action makes a change in their lives, as well as in the lives of their students and in the lives of the school, and makes it change, a huge impact in the school setting. As Paul mentions, we don't expect them to make a major change in the school, but each single step has a very specific importance in the school culture as a whole. So they are aware that whatever they do, depending on their field of study, whether it's big or small, that small step is very meaningful and unique as it's implied in the action research. So generally in their stories, you can see that they should have a plan. So they do that plan, they put it into practice, and reflection is very important. As Paul mentions, documenting. So in a way, they are creating their own documentation studios because they are taking photos, they are writing reflections, they are asking their students to write reflections about it from time to time, which that's what I admired a lot. Like every Wednesday, as far as I remember, generally they have some mentoring sessions with Paul in which they have some two-way of communication in which they share their experiences and have some ideas, share it, and that reflection session is very important and a very powerful importance in the process. So they're aware of the fact that whatever the result is, the process is very important. Learning in that process and trying to create communities of practice with their students, sometimes with their parents, with their colleagues, and at the same time, after 2 years, after having some talks with me and having some talks with other visiting scholars, they became aware of the importance of the visiting scholars who come and visit the school. Because now they're aware of the fact that whoever comes and visits schools, they can learn more from those experiences. And those experiences are powerful tools for professional development. So, and at the same time, you know, after a while, there are some young resident scholars who are eager to focus more on research, and they feel more courageous to conduct new research agendas. But at the same time, a couple of them are more courageous to pursue their graduate studies as PhD students or as master's students in different parts of the world. So maybe in this context, Paul, can I ask you, like, as the director of the program, what were your expectations for resident scholars? And to what extent have you realized this dream? Because this is a dream that has come true. And can you talk a little bit about it?
Sure. I think originally we were thinking of supporting just 1 or 2 staff members and giving them release time from a class. And the expectation was that they would be focusing on something that the school really wanted to see happen, and they could have that time to help make it happen. So I guess quasi moving into a facilitator role for some particular project. But in the first year, the applications we got, we weren't real satisfied that they were the right ones to do. So we changed the program to giving smaller amounts of money. We do actually have a financial incentive too, and we put aside some money for presentations and so on. But we went to a model where many people could apply. At the beginning, it wasn't competitive because there was more money in our coffer for this than we had applicants. But after 3-4 years, we'd get maybe 10, 11 applicants for the 8 spots that we had of our faculty. And remember, our student population is 280. We have maybe 40 to 45 people who teach classes. So 8 of those folks out of the 45, of course, not all 45 are applying each year. But our expectation became that first and foremost, it was good professional development for the person doing it. So we could take some projects that were a little bit outside what the school was interested in, perhaps, or that we weren't totally confident in because we thought it'd be good professional development for that person. But then also our application process steered people more or less into areas that we were interested in. So you can see on the, hopefully on the slide here with Özge speaking to one of our resident scholars. We had programs like the self-paced math. We had 2 different teachers working on that actually in the same year, one in the lower school, one upper. And then we have the citizen science push and the ecological commitment and so on. We were able to get a variety of projects. Some of them would last 1 year, sometimes they'd go on to a 2nd or even a 3rd year. And I think it's good professional development for the person, but the conversation around it and the confidence that it breeds and that feeling of becoming professional, Özge, that you mentioned, that's gold. I mean, that makes people feel invested in their jobs and wanted, and the feeling of growing and being a professional. All that's really good stuff.
Yes. Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much for this explanation. And as Paul mentioned, as you can see in this photo, this is a photo taken in our office in the Edge Chalet laser office. So visiting scholars come and do their research activities, but at the same time, you know, I had the opportunity to meet visiting scholars during my time, 1 month time, this last year and 2 years ago. And here I am having a conversation with one of the resident scholars, and he was so thrilled with the idea of being a resident scholar that he wanted to pursue this in other parts of the world, because people started to dream bigger and they start to have bigger dreams in ways of channeling these communities of practice in different parts of the world. For example, in terms of self-paced mathematics, my colleague who worked on this, he's a scholar from Canada, and as far as I remember, Canada, right? And he started working in Leysin for a couple of years ago, and I attended a couple of his self-paced mathematics classes. And after a while, you know, he started to attend conferences, and in the conferences, people from various parts of the world read his article, and that's why they visited his session. And he was so honored to hear people that they attended his session because they have seen the article before and they wanted to meet him personally and get some consultancy and some friendship support from a friend from Leysin. So, you know, this idea of creating communities of practice turns out to be creating international communities of practice, extending its horizons in different parts of the world. What is important here is that Paul proposes this idea, and this enables resident scholars to have a real research setting. So it's not something artificial. You know, in sessions like consultancies and in mentoring sessions from time to time, we scholars in various parts of the world welcome teachers and ask them questions. Okay, talk about your problems, talk about your desire, and talk about your dreams. But here, we enable them to talk about their lived experiences. So it's something that's not artificial. It's something that's internalized. It's something that had been thought about it for a while, and which is good. You know, they share it openly. It's not something that's artificial.
Can I interject there, Özge? We often hear about professional development that there are some hallmarks that you need to have decent professional development. It's ongoing for one, which this allows because they're in their home setting, and then it's in their home setting, so it's actually classroom based and situated right there.
Exactly.
It's autonomous, or at least there's lots of choice about what people are doing. Özge, can I flip over to visiting scholars so that we don't break too much our promise of giving lots of time for discussion?
Sure.
Yes, okay. I'm going to put in the chat now a link to the research center. If you go there, we don't mind if you're multitasking. If you go there, you can see, if you scroll down, you can click on the resident scholar section, and that will show you the variety of projects that have been done and who Özge may have been speaking with about what they've done and so on. It'll give you a good feeling for the range of programs of resident scholars over the years. At the same time, as I flip to visiting scholars, you can see the set of visiting scholars and who they are and where they're coming from. The list for this current year is still so optimistic because of current situations. We're not having visitors. We hope to be able to start again at some point, of course, like everybody on the planet. But we'll work with some of them online as well. So visiting scholars, this idea started about the same time as resident scholars because we had one person from a town who had worked in town before here where we are located. He wanted to come back and research IB. So he came from Japan, stayed with us for a couple of months, worked largely by himself, really enjoyed it. His name is at the very top of that list of all those names on the door there in the middle. He went back to Japan and liked the experience enough. We continued working with him. I'm still connected today. And we sat down after he was gone and said, you know, I think we could get more people to come. Like, there's no reason that we couldn't have more people come. So for a long time, I had an office in the original building where we started, and I put up each person's name as they came until the door was full. And then we actually moved buildings, and I moved to a different system. You see a picture actually of Özge there on the left. So we started putting our visiting scholars up on screens before they would even arrive, so people would know who's on campus and a little bit of their background and what they're doing. There hasn't been a visiting scholar who hasn't appreciated actually seeing themselves up in the lights like that. And Özge, you mentioned actually all the interactions you had in the cafeteria. I was looking through our research notes today, and that comes up over and over and over, right? It's like, it's the equivalent of the water cooler in an office, right? It's like in the cafeterias where you meet the various teachers, establish some relationships, and then get invited to their classes. And like you discovered, you get more invites than you can handle after a while, because people really do have this culture in mind of wanting to share their story and have ideas. It happened to me just today in the cafeteria where someone said, you know, I've got this idea. Can I sit down? Do you mind? And it was fantastic. It was a super interesting idea. Visiting scholars come from all over. They might be graduate students working on a particular project. They might be full professors wanting to go somewhere to have a nice place to read and write. Almost all of them, although we don't say they need to do anything with the school, get involved with the school. Some come for a specific reason. Like I had a couple of folks come from Kazan that I also met when I met Özge, who set up a research study about cyberbullying. They had done the study in Russia and they wanted to repeat it in other countries. So they came and did that here. We just had a variety of people working on curriculum development. And then at some point with the self-regulation focus, that's my own interest, we started getting very involved with the movement to pull agility originally from software world, business world, and so on, into school to help support our efforts to get students being more self-regulated. So we decided, Özge and I, we should research a little bit what we're doing so we know a little bit more. When we interviewed 10 of our visiting scholars, and we discovered the thing about the cafeteria, for one. It's not just about the cafeteria, though. The thing about networking. And it was the networking with our own faculty. But as the program got bigger, it started to become networking between visiting scholars. So as Özge's underscored, it's become a community of practice that's international, with Özge, for example, being quite familiar now with agility because she met the visiting scholar from California who was doing training with us on that. And actually she brought some of her colleagues from Istanbul to that training. It really has served to just help everybody spread ideas around and reinforce and bring what they can to the table, and so on. We found that not just the younger visiting scholars, but many of them mentioned growth as a scholar, learning new things. Some folks are quite intrigued by international school that has 40 different languages going on at the same time. For some people, that's their everyday life, but for some it's not. So just living in the milieu, they felt like they were learning something. Lots of people say they've had a really rewarding and productive time with us because they either had time to read the things that they never had time for when they're distracted by everything else that's going on, or because they got involved with curriculum development or something else while they were here. I've got just a few stories of a couple of people. If any of you folks that I'm mentioning ever hear this, it'd be really nice if you contacted me. We'll debrief a little bit. One visiting scholar, she came 3 different times, Alice, lives in Australia now. She was fantastic. She was a graduate student at the time. And I think the biggest thing that she may have gotten out of being here is that feeling that when you're away from your own setting, you're treated a little bit differently. She felt like she was treated as a real academic. She had stepped into something new. So she was becoming professional because she kind of went up a couple notches just by being invited to be in this different area. Dasha and Elena, I just had an email swap with Elena today. They were here a couple years ago. They're the ones who did the study at the university in Kazan, Russia. Fantastic that they wanted access to students and staff, and I could serve as the institutional review board more or less here on a little bit more informal level, but I could look out for student safety but still get them access so they could interview and survey students without falling outside of GDPR, for example. We had an Icelandic scholar who came and really wanted to develop some curriculum. We worked together. I put my summer camp hat on and we came up with some great curriculum that I've used in training since on the rights of the child. And then John from California with all the work in agility. That wasn't just a one-time thing either. He came 3 times he's been here. And I traveled last fall to Colorado where I met John and others to work on some pieces that, you know, he helped me get started with here as a visiting scholar. It really propelled me into his circle. And we hope that that kind of stuff makes a big impact down the road. So really, really fun stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And Paul, can I ask you, as the director, what do you want to accomplish by inviting visiting scholars in the future?
Yeah, I always answer that the biggest thing is that I want all of us faculty at the high school to rub shoulders with other academics. It just makes the high school environment just feel a little bit more academic for the teachers. It's not like as teachers we're not challenged by what we teach. But it is a different level of engagement when you're working with people from the outside, coming from the university, new ideas and so on. Plus, we're a small environment, so it's not that our ideas get stale exactly, but we kind of reinforce ourselves by talking to ourselves all the time. It's really great to have someone from the outside to challenge us a bit more and give us a push. So it's like creating a mini university and that feeling that you have at the university. In fact, the notes today, as I was looking through the interviews of the visiting scholars, one person wrote, among other things, or had replied among other things, the conversations I had were like an extension of my grad school. And she had just finished grad school at the time. And that really resonated with me because it's like, yes, that's what I want. I can't control what the conversations are, what area of PD and so on, but we can put people in contact with each other that are going to have good conversations no matter what they're about. That's what I'm going for.
Can I add one more thing for visiting scholar thing? For example, as part of that visiting scholar team,
Yeah.
in communities of practice, generally we talk about time because it's not a one-time thing. So it should be repeated a couple of times. So I know that there are some visiting scholars, as you mentioned, who visited school more than 2 times or 3 times. So in my case, for example, the more I visited, the more I felt more like a family member in the school setting. And
Yeah.
then in this way, the trust and sincerity is cultivated so that, we can share openly our weaknesses, about the way how we want to cultivate our weaker points in terms of doing research or in some other areas. We learn a lot more by observing, looking, and trying to look at the mirrors.
Yeah.
In my case, as a visiting scholars, to be honest, so generally, as you mentioned, generally, when we say being a visiting scholar, people thought you have to visit a faculty or a university, but this is a school serving like a university. In my case, and in the other cases, generally, that's what I heard a couple of times.
Yeah, and it relates to something you said earlier too about becoming professional. When we started our professional development program here 10, 12 years ago, our tagline was becoming the professionals we already are, right? So not saying that we're broken and need to be fixed, and certainly not saying we can't do it and we need to bring in somebody from the university to help us out, because how would we know what to do, right? We're all professionals, lots of training. We just need to organize that training in a way that we're able to, what's the term, like bootstrap ourselves up, like get the most out of everything that we have. Or another way to say it would be, we want to be more than the sum of our parts. Because at any school, there's an incredible amount of talent. And then it's not that all people that come in from the outside are bad. They can be very effective, and we bring people in too from the outside. But oftentimes you might have a really highly skilled, interested, motivated group of teachers, but you put them in a room with an outside person that's come in that's not connected with them and might be not quite hitting the mark about what people are interested in. And you've blown an opportunity, right? You've spent time with those faculty together that you could have done something much more interesting if you just leverage what your own staff knows. So I guess that's the other way to answer your previous question. That's what I want out of resident scholars, the whole professional development program, and I think visiting scholars help that along. Should we jump to the Agile Coffee board? So
Sure.
for those of you online with us, you can still add in more questions if you like. You also have the ability to vote up to 3 times for these questions that are here, so that automatically the questions that have more votes will rise to the top. And then, they should, if I set it up that way, hold on. The ones with more votes now have risen to the top. It's only one that's had an upvote. So if you want to vote, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll just take them as they come, okay? So this is a big one. How would I get started, and what sort of small step would be right for my school? So how would I actually get started? What sort of small step? I think the question sort of answers it. Take a small step. I think you would want to take whatever you are currently doing and give it the next logical small expansion, right? Don't try to go inviting, like we had last year, 20 visiting scholars in the first year. Go for a professional development program that had been perhaps something that you sent faculty to, but now you're going to do the same thing by keeping the faculty at home. You probably have to anyway right now, and putting some of them in charge of making that program as good as possible. Just being in charge of something, right, is going to be professional development by itself for that person. And then if it works with other folks, you've began a seed of a program that's becoming the professionals we already are, instead of sending people away to get trained by somebody else. I think that's how I would start. Did resident scholars say anything to you, Özge, about that on that kind of line?
Yeah, exactly. And generally, that's what I was going to propose, the idea that, in a a couple of cases in Turkey, in other parts of the world. Sometimes we had conversations with the school administrators and the founders of some of the schools. And they were thrilled to hear the idea of what is done at Laser, but it's not easy to put it into practice. I was going to say that, like, generally we are so obsessed with the idea of traditional look, this is what I know, and putting people in one big conference room, more than 100 people, and trying to give a conference from a one way of communication. But here, this some sort of, the mentality here is based on interaction, collaboration, and partnership. So it's a different mindset. So, you know, who will be our colleagues who are going to listen to our conference or this webinar will start, I'm sure that will start thinking the idea of how they can practice it. But first we have to make a change in our minds. We should have a different mindset in a way to establish a culture in which one learns from another. In the case of resident scholars as well, like resident scholars indicated that they learned about more from the experiences lived from their friends. For example, Tom Cosgrove or Kevin, for example, or Rachel, you know, are friends from various parts of the field. And they realize that it's a lifelong learning process, but at the same time, from an interdisciplinary perspective, they can put their strengths together and work on a research paper by putting their power and energy together. Especially, for example, if they're going to work on a case related with an interdisciplinary issue, whether it's the case of refugee students or whether it's the case about digital citizenship or English language teaching, or in the Aaron's case, you know, they can learn from each other. So the culture is very important. And that's one thing, that's one single thing which is very important, is to learn from each other, but not using the word, but practicing into practice, putting it into
and then being able to demonstrate some learning. And this will sound like a shameless plug for ECIS, but if there's any place to do it, I suppose it's here. In the past, our resident scholars who had put something together during the course of the year, those were the ones that we asked to apply to present at ECIS conferences. And then some of them never had presented. So part of the function of the Research Center was to help them with their presentation so that it would put their presentation as good light as possible. And then when ECIS for a while had the publication Global Insights, same way, when people wanted to write, we would share drafts around of the writing with some of the resident scholars that were involved at the time. So they'd get some feedback. Now, here's the plug. The Georgie and folks there at ECIS have put a format up called Insightful, which is very easy to contribute to, open to everybody. And you should really consider writing up. It's just a simple act of fairly informal documentation. It can be of something that you're doing at school that's really neat. So another way to get started, what a small step might be, is to take somebody that self-starter who's been talking about something that they're doing in class. One, go and visit the class, see what's going on. And then two, encourage that person to actually write up what they're doing and share the draft with a couple of people to hone the writing a little bit and the ideas, and then send it off to Insightful and see what happens. It's really rewarding when faculty say like, oh, my article's published, right? Then we turn around and we advertise to the whole school in our faculty email group, right? Like so-and-so had an article come out this past week. Here's the link, check it out. We can also put that up then on our digital signage within the school, and we can use it for social media, which sort of helps us with our image and advertising to parents and prospective students and so on. It's really good stuff, and it's not hard to get started that way. I'll move that one over to Don, unless you have something to say, Özge.
Exactly, exactly. I totally agree. But at the same time, maybe we should also mention our weekly talks. That I say our because also I'm a part of that family. Laser talks every Wednesday afternoon, every the beginning first week of every month, I guess. Generally, you have regular conversational talks, laser talks. And in those talks, what I have observed as a visiting scholar, that resident scholars, it's a chance for them to come together to talk about an issue. In each session, one resident scholar shares his or her research. And in that research, it's like both an academic talk, but at the same time, a very friendly talk in which they hear the story of Daryl, they hear the story of Aaron, they hear the story of other colleagues who are resident scholars. And those talks are powerful tools that give inspiration to other resident scholars and other prospective resident scholars who do not have the courage to submit a project to the laser. In some of the informal conversations, I overheard from my friends, and they also said that after attending a laser talk, an afternoon talk, a dinner talk, they say that in those sessions, they have seen that it's not something that is difficult to accomplish. So they can do research. They can be courageous enough to start something, because to start means to finish it. So to start the journey is more important to have the finishing it.
And it is going to get a little pressure there, because I say if you are a resident scholar, you need to do one of these talks. And while the bar isn't terribly high, for some it's quite an experience to stand up in front of your colleagues and say what it is that you're doing in your class, and be able to then discuss it and take some feedback about it, right? Because it can be, for many, it can be a first experience of sharing that way in front of their colleagues. But excellent opportunity to get up in front of a small, very forgiving and friendly group, like you say, of scholars. Özge, do you have in Turkey at the university something like a brown bag lunch? I expect you did that in Arizona when you were there.
Yeah, exactly. We had it. We don't use the term brown bag because we love going out and having kebabs in Gaziantep, you know. But we have coffee talks. We call it coffee talks or afternoon teas. Generally, with the tea, we have some pastries and other stuff. So this is what we learn a lot in those informal conversations or in those talks. So
and this is what our laser focused talks are, right? It's a tea talk in the afternoon. Like, get together and share what you are working on.
Exactly.
How about this question? Was it hard to work with a corporate organization? I don't know what corporate organization, what triggered the question. I'm going to leave it there for now. If whoever wrote it wants to edit, you can click on the little pen and edit that. We did share examples of the resident scholar projects by sharing the site. If you're listening to this and the site wasn't visible, you can visit LAS, LaysonAmericanSchool.ch/laser, and you will find all of the resident scholar and visiting scholar projects over the last 5 or 6 years. Projects have been really varied. We started off only in academics because that's where my head was, but they have moved to activities, residential life, the health center, other aspects of the school have all gotten involved over time. And there's lots of examples there. When movement is allowed, can you come and visit? Yes, that is the point. That would be great. So if you are interested and have the time for an exchange, or if you want to come learn with us and teach us and learn from us, we're in. Just contact me, and I'm very, very happy to entertain any sort of ideas about what you would like to do. I found before COVID, I found that we were maxing out at with how many visitors we could take in a year. But we've sort of have a reset year now, and hopefully next year when we start up again, I suspect we will have some spots for people. So do get in touch if you're interested. Georgie is also encouraging you to contribute to Insightful. She's showing you the link there if you want to take a look at some of the articles that are there. Really nice entryway way to get started. I think that's huge. And then I don't think we need to discuss Özge, the one that says very excited to be joining you here today. we'll let that one be. But we were very excited to be able to join you. And I guess if anybody has a last comment or question, we could probably just take that from you directly.
Just while we're waiting, Paul and Özge, thank you so much for, I just love the whole concept of the visiting scholars and resident scholars, and that I think for me what really resonated is about becoming the professionals we already are. That comment is really, really quite powerful. The opportunity to actually allow people to practice and build their courage, it absolutely is fundamental, and it's the way that we're going to actually exemplify and develop our teachers of the future. So thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time to share this. And we will actually be forwarding on a copy of the webinar to those who weren't able to attend today. But thank you. And we just wait to see if there's any other questions. I think Bill, you may have popped a comment on here. I'll just thanks very much. Happy to be here. So we're really delighted to have you here.
I would just add that if you do want to get started, it's part of my role I see as outreach to other schools. I'm happy for zero cost to just have that first conversation and see if there's something in it for you to get started, and if I could give any advice or whatever, I'm absolutely happy to do that. So don't hesitate to contact us here.
Exactly. And you know, Paul, maybe we can use this term as Christopher Clark mentions, a sentence: feeding the soul of teachers, feeding the soul of student teachers. So at Laser, I believe that our souls are fed, and we are trying to feed the souls of resident scholars, and create communities of practice that will cultivate and feed our own souls.
Yeah, and I feel there are days when, any job is like, oh my God, but I feel like I've got the best job in the world. So
I think on that note, given everything that we're going through at the moment, I have to thank you both for all your time today. And
thanks everybody.
Hugely inspired by everything that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks everybody. Thanks, Özge.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
See you soon.